The silence in my childhood bedroom felt heavier than it ever had. A suffocating blanket woven from unspoken words and a single devastating sentence. It was her birthday wish. Mine. For me. A final, etched-in-stone decree that my presence was no longer desired. The dust motes danced in the slivers of late afternoon sun that pierced the worn blinds, illuminating the stillness. My gaze drifted unfocused towards the shelf above my desk, a miniature museum of my burgeoning adolescence. There, nestled amongst faded school photographs and a chipped ceramic unicorn, sat the worn teddy bear. Its button eyes seemed to hold a knowing sadness, its fur matted from years of desperate embraces. I remembered clutching it through countless childhood nightmares, its familiar weight a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. Now, it just seemed like another relic of a time when my existence hadn't been declared an inconvenience, a burden to be shed. The air in the house, usually thick with the subtle, insidious symphony of her passive-aggressive sighs and pointed comments, was eerily still. It was a quiet that held a predatory tension, a silence that screamed louder than any outburst. I'd spent years, it felt like a lifetime, navigating the subtle currents of her disapproval, learning to anticipate the almost imperceptible tightening of her lips that meant I'd stepped too far, the curt dismissal that signaled I was in the way. This wasn't a game of social chess I'd mastered. This was a fundamental shift, a seismic tremor that shook the very foundations of my understanding of home. This wasn't about a forgotten chore or an ill-timed question that had earned me a frosty reception. This was about erasure, a deliberate act of unmaking. The decision, if one could call it that, wasn't a sudden impulsive act, not a flash of anger that ignited an immediate reaction or a meticulously calculated plot hatched in the dead of night. It was a slow, creeping realization, a chilling understanding that bloomed in the vast, echoing void left by her words. I'd always strived for her approval, a foolish Sisyphean task that had consumed my formative years. Every achievement, every minor milestone, from acing a math test to learning to ride my bike without training wheels, was met with a lukewarm "that's nice," or a weary sigh that quickly morphed into a comparison to someone else's more impressive feat, usually my younger brother's. He, bless his oblivious heart, was the golden child, the sun around which the family orbit perpetually spun. He was the recipient of all the effusive praise and genuine warmth that I had so desperately, so pathetically craved. I, on the other hand, was the competent, quiet one, the one who effortlessly kept the peace, the one who smoothed over her rough edges with a practiced, almost invisible hand. I was the wallpaper, always present, a part of the scenery, but rarely, if ever, truly seen or acknowledged for my own substance. The finality of her wish, however, was something else entirely, a chillingly different dimension of her long-held, unspoken sentiments. It wasn't a desire for a temporary distance, for a brief respite or a much-needed break. It was a desire for my complete and utter absence, not just from her physical space, not just from the confines of this house, but from the very fabric of her life. The implication, delivered with a disarming serenity on a day that should have been marked by celebration, was that my very existence was a burden she could no longer bear, a weight too heavy to carry. And in that suffocating silence that followed, something deep inside me shifted. The years of trying to earn a place at her table, of trying to be enough, of trying to fit into a mold that was perpetually reshaped, finally irrevocably broke. I didn't pack a suitcase, the clatter of zippers and rustle of clothes a sound too loud, too conspicuous for the clandestine nature of my departure. I didn't leave a note, a final passive-aggressive communication to further cement my perceived wrongdoings. I simply walked out the back door, the familiar squeak of the rusty hinge a protest against my silent exodus, and stepped into the cool evening air, the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I'd left behind. I just kept walking, the rhythm of my footsteps a steady, determined cadence on the cracked pavement. The town I grew up in was a small, tightly woven tapestry, a place where everyone knew everyone, and by extension, everyone knew my mother's carefully curated opinions on most things, including her children. For a long time, I'd been the unwitting subject of her confidences, the unwilling focal point of her narratives whispered to her friends over lukewarm coffee. I'd heard her complain about me, her voice laced with a weary, almost theatrical martyrdom. "She's just so difficult," she'd lament, her brow furrowed in a performance of materna anguish. Or, "I don't know why she insists on being like this," as if my very being was a willful act of rebellion. It was a narrative she'd carefully constructed over years, a masterclass in subtle manipulation, painting me as the troublesome child, the constant source of her quiet misery, the shadow that obscured her otherwise perfect life. I found a small apartment in a city a few hours away, a sprawling metropolis where my name meant nothing and my past was my own, a blank slate upon which I could begin to write anew. I got a job, a simple one that paid the bills and didn't require any significant emotional investment, a buffer against the encroaching anxieties of an unknown future. I didn't contact anyone. My father, long since divorced from my mother and remarried, had built his own life, a world into which I no longer fit. My brother, happily absorbed in his own burgeoning world of young adulthood, would probably not notice my absence for a while, or at least not in a way that demanded immediate action. And her, well, she'd gotten exactly what she wanted, a void where I used to be. The first few months were a strange, almost disorienting blend of liberation and a gnawing, persistent emptiness. The absence of her criticism, the constant barrage of subtle barbs and veiled disappointments, was like a phantom limb, a sensation I was still getting used to, a quiet I was learning to inhabit. But then, inevitably, the whispers started. It was inevitable in a town like ours, where gossip traveled faster than the speed of light, and news, however distorted, spread like wildfire. She told her friends, of course, initiating the carefully orchestrated dissemination of her version of events. And her friends, loyal to their unspoken pacts, told their friends. The story that circulated, I later pieced together through fragmented conversations and oblique hints from distant relatives, was that I'd simply run off, that I was troubled and she was heartbroken that I'd abandoned her in her time of need. The narrative of the difficult child, the one who caused her so much pain, was amplified, cemented in the collective memory of our small community, a cautionary tale whispered with hushed reverence. Then came the family events, the obligatory gatherings that punctuated the year, milestones that demanded a presence, a show of familial unity. My aunt's 70th birthday, a big affair held at the local community hall, a testament to her long-standing influence. My brother called, his voice a little hesitant, a subtle tremor of apprehension underlying his usual cheerfulness. "Moms, she's asked about you," he'd said, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air between us. "She's wondering if you're going to come." I just said, "No." There was no explanation, no elaborate justification, no apology. Just a quiet, firm refusal, a simple statement of fact. He didn't press. He probably didn't understand the depth of the chasm that had opened between us, or the deliberate, calculated reasons for my continued absence. It was at Christmas, the quintessential family holiday, that I truly saw the ripple effect of my departure, the unintended consequences of a mother's wish. My brother, now married with a young child of his own, had been alternating holidays with his wife's family for their big gatherings. This year, to placate his mother, to ease her perceived loneliness, he decided they'd do a combined family Christmas at his place, a neutral territory designed to foster harmony. He called me again, a little more insistent this time, a note of pleading in his voice. "It would mean a lot to Mom," he'd said, his words tinged with a sense of obligation. "She misses you." I pictured her then, sitting at the head of the table, her face a carefully constructed mask of practiced maternal sorrow, the benevolent matriarch radiating an aura of quiet suffering. I saw the hushed conversations around me, the concerned glances exchanged over steaming plates of food, the whispered questions about my whereabouts, my silence. And I saw myself, a spectral presence at the feast, forced to endure the silent accusations and the manufactured sympathy that would invariably surround me, a pariah in my own family. I pictured the whole charade, the performative sadness that would undoubtedly cast her as the long-suffering victim and me as the villain, all in absentia, my absence speaking volumes about my supposed transgressions. "Tell her," I said, my voice steady, surprisingly so, a newfound resolve hardening its edges, "that I'm doing well. Tell her that I'm happy. And tell her that I'm not coming." He sighed, a weary exhalation that conveyed his own exhaustion with the perpetual drama. "She's going to be devastated. She got what she wished for," I replied, the words landing with a quiet, absolute finality, a stark echo of her own pronouncement. The real consequence, the one that resonated far beyond my mother's immediate circle and her refully constructed narrative, came a few months later, a slow burn that revealed the true depth of her manipulative tendencies. My younger brother, who had always been shielded from the worst of her manipulations, who had always been the recipient of her preferential treatment, started to see the patterns, the insidious tactics he had unknowingly been spared. He'd always been her favorite, the one who rarely drew her ire, the one who effortlessly embodied her idealized vision of a child. But as he got older, as he started to form his own opinions and express his own desires, he began to witness her subtle maneuvers firsthand. The way she could twist his words, reframe his intentions, the way she could make him feel guilty for living his own life, for prioritizing his own burgeoning family, the way she could subtly undermine his relationships, planting seeds of doubt and discord. He called me then, not with an urgent plea for my return, not with a desperate attempt to mend the fractured family ties, but simply to talk, to process the dawning realization that had settled upon him like a heavy cloak. He'd seen her phone, accidentally, a brief, unguarded glimpse into her private communications. A string of texts to my aunt, to his wife, to a few other relatives. The texts weren't about my absence, not about my supposed rebellion, but about him. She was painting him as ungrateful, as distant, as not making enough effort, as neglecting his familial duties. The same old song, the same familiar tune, just with a different protagonist, a new scapegoat for her perpetual dissatisfaction. "I never realized," he said, his voice thick with a dawning, disbelieving understanding, a raw edge of something akin to betrayal in his tone. "I always thought it was just Mom being Mom. You know, her way of showing she cares. But she's really good at this, isn't she? Making everyone else feel like the bad guy." That was the quietest victory, a triumph that existed not in my direct experience, but in his newfound awareness. He started to pull back, not with anger or defiance, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a calm, measured distance that was far more effective. He began to limit his calls, his visits, his availability. He stopped falling for the guilt trips, the subtle emotional blackmail. He learned to say no gently but firmly, a newfound strength in his voice that I hadn't heard before. I saw my mother once by chance, a deliberate, calculated detour on a visit to a friend in our old town. It was a moment I'd both dreaded and in a strange way anticipated. She was with her sister, my aunt, their figures familiar against the backdrop of the brightly lit grocery store aisle. As I walked down the aisle, my heart did a quick flutter, a momentary panic, a vestige of the old anxieties. But then I remembered. I wasn't the lost child anymore, the one who craved her acknowledgement. I was just a stranger, a person with my own life, my own destination. She saw me. Her eyes, usually so sharp and critical, so adept at cataloging perceived flaws, widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise that briefly erased her practiced composure. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, a gesture that might have been surprise or a premonition of discomfort. My aunt followed her gaze, her face a mixture of shock and something akin to pity, a look that spoke of years of witnessing the subtle machinations of her sister. For a fleeting moment, their practiced masks, their carefully constructed facades slipped. I saw the flicker of confusion, the slight unease, the recognition of a reality they had tried so hard to control. I didn't approach them. I didn't wave, a gesture that would have acknowledged their presence and invited interaction. I just met my aunt's gaze, a neutral, almost polite acknowledgement, and then continued on my way, my hand reaching for a carton of milk, the mundane task a shield against the weight of their scrutiny. I heard my mother's voice, a hushed, urgent whisper behind me, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable, a tremor of agitation in its sound, but I didn't turn around. I walked out of the store into the bright afternoon sun, and the weight I'd carried for so long, the burden of unrequited love and unmet expectations, felt a little lighter. She'd wanted me out of her life, out of her carefully curated narrative. And in the quietest, most unremarkable way possible, I had delivered. The silence she'd craved, the void she'd so meticulously engineered, had finally found her, and this time it was of her own making.